A warm welcome to everybody on a Sunday night here in Melbourne, 8 p.m. It's a rainy night outside, so I guess it's a good place to be indoors. And welcome to everyone who's joined us, and of course to my colleague Reb Shule from Elwood Shule and our Shule, South Caulfield Shule, to both of our respective Shule attendees and those who've joined from other congregations or just from anywhere else around Australia or the world.
Are there other congregations?
Well, maybe not anymore after tonight.
In quotes, right?
But Shmuel and I are very delighted to welcome Joel, and we both saw his. He sent us an email a few weeks ago saying that he's also had to improvise like us, doing virtual shuls. He's now doing virtual comedy events, and just listening to his promo, it looked like it was a no-brainer to host you tonight, Joel. And we're both very excited as our communities are, and we look forward to tonight. Now, Joel, there's no pressure, but Joel has said if you do feel comfortable to turn on your cameras, to please do so, because I guess it's like, sometimes when I give a shiur and everybody's cameras off, and I'm giving these like wonderful insights, and I don't know if people are sleuthing or they're listening, or I don't know if you feel that same way, Shmuel.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
So here we are. So Joel, if you want to just give us a run of how the night will work.
Sure, absolutely.
And then we'll take it from there.
Well, I always start with a big thank you to the organizers. Everyone is taking a leap of faith in this Zoom era because we're collaborating with people we don't necessarily know. And I'm lucky enough to have met Shmuel and Rabbi Daniel through the internet and to be able to set this up. So how is the evening going to work? In a little bit, I will do my Zoom comedy performance. First, I'll talk a little bit about the way it usually works and some best practices to keep it going. I certainly never want to make people uncomfortable and feel like you have to turn on your cameras, as the rabbi mentioned. But if you do want to, it at least does give me a sense that there are real live human beings out there. That's one of the big challenges of doing anything over Zoom is you never really know what the response is. And as a comedian, my favorite thing about comedy is you never have to wonder how it went. If you hang a picture in an art museum, you'll spend your entire life wondering if people like it or not. When you do comedy, you know immediately if the show is going well. You also know immediately, for better or worse, if it's not. And over Zoom, you sort of lose that instant feedback. So if you do want to turn on your cameras, I'd be happy to see you. But if not, if that makes you more comfortable, that's okay as well. The other thing I really miss from live shows is the interaction with the audience. I love that comedy is really an art form that's a dialogue. Even if the audience is part of the dialogue is just the laughter, it sends a message to the comedian about what's going on. And obviously you lose a lot of that over the Zoom format as well. But I do try to keep the interaction going as best I can. One of the easiest ways is with reaction buttons. As you know, you're probably all veterans of Zoom by now, but down here in the right-hand corner, there's the reaction buttons. You can give a thumbs up or you can give an applause if you like a particular joke. Unfortunately, there are no negative reaction buttons on Zoom. So if you don't like something, you will have to give a thumbs down with your actual hand. I always want to give Jews that option of not liking something because we are a very opinionated people. And who am I to take that right away from you? Thank you for the thumbs up on that. The other way we can stay in touch is through the chat box. As I'm sure you all know, there's a little chat screen that pops up at the side. And once in a while throughout the night, I'm actually going to ask you some questions where you can chat in the answer. Right now, I'll just type, oops, I'm in Hebrew font. So I'm coming to you actually from Israel. I know someone asked before, where is he based? I am American originally, but I am living in Israel now, and I just chatted hi from Israel to everyone. So it's only 1 p.m. here and in the midst of a heat wave. So unlike the weather in Melbourne right now. But once in a while, I will be asking you questions. Please answer them through the chat. And if during the session you have a question or a comment or just something you want to let me know or let other people know, use the chat function. It's a great way to stay in touch. Of course, you probably want to know, who am I? How did I come to you in the first place? And when I've probably done about 50 to 60 Zooms at this point since the pandemic began. And when I first started, I would tell people a little bit about myself, but I soon realized that one of the advantages of Zoom is that we can show and not just tell. So I put together a little screen share about who I am, and I'll share that with you right now. Let's see. Hang on one second, we're frozen. Rabbi, give me a thumbs up if you hear me.
Yep, I
Yeah,
hear you.
okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
are we screen sharing? Yes, we have the screen share going. I will play from start. So this says Mahasipur. What's the story? Like, who is this guy? My name is Joel Chasnoff, and this is my first ever stand-up comedy performance. A lot of people want to know, when did you start doing comedy? I started at the age of 13. This is me giving the Dvar Torah at my bar mitzvah. And already I was working the crowd. I realized at a young age that humor is really a great way to get a message across. And years later, a rabbi told me that this is actually talked about in the Talmud. In the Talmud, there is a story about a rabbi named the Rava. And it says the Rava would begin every lesson with a joke. Only after his students laughed would he teach the lesson. And I think this story is in the Talmud for a reason. I think we Jews know that the best way to get a message across is by first breaking people down with some laughter, and then our minds are much more open to whatever teaching we want to share. After day school and Jewish summer camp, the next really big Jewish event of my life was joining the Israeli army at the age of 23. That's actually very old to join the Israeli army. At the age of 23, I volunteered and signed up for a combat unit of the IDF. I was sent to the 188th Armored Brigade, where I served in the Golan Heights and in South Lebanon. This is me with the Golan Heights in the background, and next to me is one of my closest friends in the unit. His name is Tim. Tim has an interesting story. He was raised Christian in Oklahoma, but when he was 18, his mother sat him down and revealed that she had actually been Jewish when Tim was born, before she converted to become born-again Christian, which meant halachically, according to Jewish law, he is Jewish as well. And as part of his identity crisis, he came and joined the Israeli army, and he became one of my closest friends in the unit. And this is us in the Golan Heights just a few weeks before we went to Lebanon. Eventually, we did go to Lebanon together and serve there, because Israel was at that time doing operations against Hezbollah. Began my stand-up comedy career. After getting out of the army, I moved back to the United States. Most of my shows are for Jewish audiences. And when you perform for Jewish audiences, I must say you get a lot of very interesting performances like this one. I don't know if you can see, this is for the Chabad of Crown Heights, which is really the world headquarters of Chabad. And if you notice, everyone in the show is male. This is because this was a Hanukkah event, and they booked me for 2 performances back to back. First was the male show, then about an hour later was the female show. Men and women could not be in the same room together, but ironically, they only paid 1 fee. Welcome to the Jewish world. That's how it works. Now we've sort of come full circle. 4 years ago, after 20 years in the United States, my family and I moved back to Israel. We live in Ra'anana. I don't know how many people know Ra'anana, but they say that Ra'anana is almost like living in Israel, because it's full of Americans, Australians, South Africans, English Jews who've moved here. You can live in Ra'anana for 40, 50 years without ever having to learn Hebrew. And this down here is a picture in the bottom right of one of my twins. She is now a soldier in the Israeli army herself. Her name is Noam, and this is her receiving her orange beret. She is a chemical warfare instructor in it's called Madrichat Abach in the Pikud HaOref, the Home Front Command. And she has a very cool job. She goes around to army bases all around the country, instructing soldiers how to stay safe during a chemical war or during a chemical attack. And this is her in the middle after giving a lesson to a platoon of Golani soldiers, all of them immigrants, all of them English-speaking immigrants. She had Americans, Canadians, Australians, Brits, and South Africans in this platoon of Golani, so a very mixed group. And this is her twin sister right here. Her name is Stav. She is serving in the engineering corps. It's called Handasa Kravi, doing very important work on tunnels. As you may know, Hamas and Hezbollah are busily building tunnels to try to bury their way into Israel, burrow their way into Israel. And there are young women like Stav whose entire job is to track them down and use special equipment to find out where those are. And nowadays, my entire career is on Zoom. Like I said, since the pandemic began, my comedy is transferred entire to the screen format. And it's a very interesting phenomenon, trying to do comedy on Zoom. And one of the big questions people have had is, should we even be doing this? Are we allowed to laugh at a time like this when people are suffering, God forbid, dying? In the United States, there have been racial riots and protests. Is it okay to be making jokes at a time like this? And I fervently believe that the answer is yes, not just as a comedian, but as a Jew. Judaism actually has a lot to say about the power and the value of humor. One of my favorite stories is about Elijah the prophet. We all know Elijah from Passover. He comes around to our tables and drinks for our wine cups during the Seder. But there's another story about Elijah where he comes to a town and someone comes up to him and says, Elijah, tell me, who is guaranteed a place in the world to come? And Elijah says, come, walk with me through the town. I'll show you. So they walk through the town together and they see some very good people, doctors and nurses and people taking care of the elderly and the sick and teachers. But none of them, the person asks, are they guaranteed a place in the world to come? And Elijah says, no, not yet. None of them are guaranteed. Only at the very end, they come to a joker, a jester. He's wearing a silly hat and he's juggling and he's dancing and singing songs and making people laugh. And Elijah points to the jester and says, he is guaranteed a place in the world to come because he brings laughter into the world. And from this story, I think we will learn one of the most important lessons of all, that humor isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity, and that we Jews are not only allowed to laugh, we're supposed to laugh. As they say, mitzvah gedolah lihyot b'simcha. It's a mitzvah, a commandment to be happy. So with that, I think we should dive into the actual jokes themselves. You know, when the pandemic first hit, I wondered, are there any jokes that can actually teach us about how to handle what's going on right now? Because I think Jewish humor actually is educational and can give us lessons on how to live. So I talked to a few rabbis, and consistently 2 jokes came up. The first joke is called The Flood. It's about the scientists of the world. They discover that a huge flood is coming in just 3 days. In 3 days, humanity will be wiped out. There will be no more planet Earth. So the heads of the world's major religions get on television and they make their pitch. The Pope gets on TV and he says, friends, the flood will be here in 3 days. That means we have 3 days to convert to Christianity and accept Jesus as our savior. And the head imam, the head of Islam, gets on television and says, friends, the flood will be here in 3 days. That means we have 3 days to convert to Islam and accept Allah as our Lord. And finally, the chief rabbi of Israel gets on television and he says, friends, the flood will be here in 3 days. That means we have 3 days to learn how to live underwater. And I love that punchline. Learn how to live underwater. It says so much about the Jewish people and who we are and our point of view on life. If you can say anything about Jews, it's that we adapt to whatever obstacles come our way. We are always learning how to live underwater. And even right now, in the midst of coronavirus, we're doing comedy from, 10,000 miles away. We are learning how to live underwater by doing it like that. So that's what the first joke that came to mind. The second joke was told to me by Rabbi Moshe Waldox. I don't know if you know that name, but he is the author of the world-renowned Big Book of Jewish Humor, which to my knowledge is the biggest collection of Jewish humor out there. And he told me this joke. He said a priest, a minister, and a rabbi are sitting around talking about what they want people to say at their funeral. And the priest says, at my funeral, I want people to say that I was a kind and generous human being. And the minister says, at my funeral, I want people to say that I was always there to listen. And the rabbi says, at my funeral, I want people to say, look, he's moving. And clearly the lesson of this joke is that even in the most dire of circumstances, even in the worst situation you can imagine, in your own casket at your own funeral, we Jews have the chutzpah to believe that the story is not yet over, that there's still more life ahead of us, and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So those 2 jokes, I think, can actually teach us a bit about how to handle the pandemic that continues to go on. And in terms of my show tonight, I like to call my show Jokes on Us. Not only that the joke is on us, but that these are jokes about us. People ask, where do you get your humor as a comedian? And I say, look around, especially if you're Jewish. We are such an amazing people, but we're also a very absurd and quirky people with all of our traditions and ways of life, that most of our jokes are easiest when we make the jokes about us. The first way to look, the first area we can look is rabbis. We love our rabbis, and there's a reason for that. Rabbis are very unique. They see the world differently, and they lead us in having our unique Jewish point of view. One of my favorite Jewish jokes about rabbis is about the man who calls up his rabbi and he says, Rabbi, you got to help me. My wife is trying to poison me. And the rabbi says, look, I'm sure your wife isn't trying to poison you. It's a big mistake, a misunderstanding. And the rabbi says, no, Rabbi, you got to help me. My wife is trying to poison me. Please help. So the rabbi says, you know what? Okay, tonight I'll call your wife. We'll have a conversation. I'll see if I can fix this situation. So that night, the rabbi calls the man's wife. He thinks it'll be a 5 or 10-minute conversation. Well, as soon as she answers the phone, this man's wife starts going on and on about her good-for-nothing husband, how lazy he is, and how he never helps in the house, and how much better their life would be if only he worked harder. The rabbi can't even get a word in edgewise. Finally, after an hour of complaining and kvetching, the rabbi is able to end the conversation. Well, the next day, the man calls the rabbi. And he says, Rabbi, did you talk to my wife? And the rabbi says, yes, I did. And the man says, well, and the rabbi says, take the poison. And let me tell you what's unique about that. Only rabbis could get away with giving that kind of advice. How come? Because unlike priests, think about it, priests don't have families. They don't get married. They don't know the struggles of a marital relationship. They live alone. But rabbis, they know what we are like. They know what the common man can go through. And for that reason, they're able to give us advice like is embodied in this joke. One of my other favorite rabbi jokes, the other one that I'll share about rabbis, is about the barber. A priest goes to a barber to get his haircut. It looks wonderful. And after the haircut, the priest reaches for his wallet to pay. But the barber says, no, you're a man of God. You're a priest. You're holy. It's free on the house. So the priest thanks him. And that afternoon, he comes back with a crucifix for the rabbi. Well, the next day, who comes in? A minister. He gets his haircut, looks wonderful, reaches for his wallet to pay, but the barber says, nope, you're a minister, you're a man of God, you're holy, it's free on the house. So the minister thanks him. And that afternoon, he comes back with a New Testament. Well, the next day, who comes in, of course? The rabbi. He gets his haircut, looks just wonderful. He reaches for his money to pay, but the barber stops him. Nope, you're holy, you're a man of God, it's on the house, free. So the rabbi thanks him. And that afternoon, he comes back with another rabbi. Now, people have said to me, is this joke anti-Semitic? It's about Jews only wanting a good deal, only wanting money. And I actually don't think so at all. I think this joke is about rabbis seeing the world for how it really is. Rabbis are clever. If haircuts are free, why not bring another rabbi? But someone once said to me, what if the person telling you this joke were not Jewish? Would it then change your opinion on whether or not the joke was offensive? And I must agree, I think it would. I think this person had a point. Humor is one of the only art forms where the person delivering the art actually influences the meaning of the art itself. And I think if someone not Jewish were telling this joke, then suddenly it would be anti-Semitic. And believe it or not, this actually reminds me of one of my favorite episodes of the TV show Seinfeld. I don't know if we have any Seinfeld fans here, but in one of my favorite episodes, it's called The Anti-Dentite. It's about a dentist who converts to Judaism, and within weeks of converting, he starts telling Jewish jokes. And Jerry, the main character, actually has an issue with this. I'll play a quick clip from the episode, and then we'll finish up and move on to the next topic.
Fine, I'll make an appointment. All right, it is cavity time. Here we go. Which reminds me, did you hear the one about the rabbi and the farmer's daughter? Huh? Those aren't matzo balls. What?
Tim, do you think you should be making jokes like that?
Why not? I'm Jewish, remember?
I know, but...
Jerry, it's our sense of humor that sustained us as a people for 3,000 years.
5,000.
5,000, even better. Okay. Chrissy, give me a shtickle of fluoride.
I love that punchline, shtickle of fluoride. And I also love that Seinfeld, a show about nothing, was able to explore one of the biggest questions out there, which is who owns humor? Who gets to tell jokes? So the next topic I want to talk about is family. You know, where can we get our humor from? Our families. Look around at our families. Every Jewish family is similar, and yet no two Jewish families are exactly alike. As a stand-up comedian, I love to talk about my own family in my stand-up act, and I always start in my favorite place, my mother. Yes, Jewish mothers. You might wonder why there's so many jokes about Jewish mothers. It's because comedy has to be written about troublesome situations. You can't write jokes about things that are perfect and beautiful. No, you need tsuris, as we say in Europe. We need in Yiddish, we need some suffering and to be able to write humor. And luckily, our Jewish mothers have been giving us tsuris for hundreds and thousands of years. When I talk about my own Jewish mother, what do I think about? Well, the first thing I think about was the way my mother was able to worry about everything. I don't know what Jewish mothers are like down under in Australia, but certainly in the Midwest of America where I grew up, Jewish mothers had this ability to look at any situation, analyze it, and find the potential danger somewhere in the situation. Anything can hurt you if you do it correctly. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to give you a few scenarios from my own life. These are true stories. I would like to see if there is someone in our Zoom audience tonight who knows the answers to these questions. Why was my mother worried in these harmless situations? If you can figure out why, please chat the answer in so we can see your answer. Okay, situation number one. When I was growing up in Chicago, we usually took very small family vacations. We would get in the car and drive to St. Louis or to Wisconsin. But one year, my father planned what he called the epic family vacation. We were going to fly from Chicago to San Francisco. We were going to rent a car and drive the most beautiful highway in America, Highway 1, the Pacific Coast Highway along the Pacific Ocean from San Francisco down to Los Angeles. We would then go to Disneyland in Los Angeles and fly back to Chicago. My mom said, no, that's dangerous. Instead, we should fly to Los Angeles, rent a car, drive up Highway 1 to San Francisco, and then fly back home. Now, to me, that was the exact same trip, just backwards, done in reverse. What was my mother's logic in this situation? Does anyone know what was my Jewish mother worried about in this really harmless scenario? I'll give about 3 or 4 seconds for you to type in the answers. I see a few of you already typing. We'll see who gets the answer first. Going downhill is dangerous. Haley. What a dark psychology Haley has. Enjoy the theme park before you all die in a plane crash. Good Lord. I think Jay Borowski was the first one to get it correct. She was worried about driving on the road near the coast. Yes, very good. When you're driving from San Francisco to Los Angeles, you're next to the cliff and you could plummet into the Pacific Ocean. Driving north, you're next to a mountain where all you have to worry about is boulders falling onto your car. A much safer scenario. Very good, Jay Borowski. Congrats. So here's the follow-up question. We did, in fact, because my mother is the boss of the family, we did, in fact, fly to Los Angeles first. However, what did we do? My mom split our family up. That's my father, my mother, 2 brothers, and me, 5 people. My mother split our family up onto 2 separate flights. And when I asked her how come, she refused to tell me why. What was my mother thinking? And before I could even get the words out of my mouth, Sarah Rabin texted, so we don't all die together. What a very optimistic way to phrase that sentence, I must point out. Yes, my mom's theory is that if we're on a plane and we're all together, if that plane crashes, then we all go down. However, at flights, if one of the planes crashes, it's okay. Only half the family goes down. The other half can live on and mourn them in misery, in guilt for the rest of our existence. Very, very good. All right, you guys are 2 for 2. Here's the last question. When I was growing up as a child, my mother had a rule. And that rule was that I could not wear anything with my name on it. Some of my friends had shirts, and on the back of the shirt, it said Joshua or Stephen, or they had their backpack. It was their name was stitched into their backpack. Well, my mom would not let me have anything, backpack, clothing, where my name could be visible. Why? What would she be worried about in that situation? Ofer Z, I would say you got it 80% correct. A Jewish name would provoke kidnapping, and Esther Kleiner, I think, really nailed it, because you'll get kidnapped. Yes, that is how Jewish mothers think. If your name is on a shirt or a backpack, you will get kidnapped. How come? Because a stranger could see you in that jersey, in that shirt, and he would read your name, and then he would call me by name and make up a story. Hey, Joel, you're an old friend of mine. You don't remember me, but your mom sent me to pick you up. Come get into my car. I'll give you some candy. And I would go with him. You know why? Because apparently I'm a complete idiot. At least that's what my mother thinks about me. And by the way, this is why there are no Jewish athletes in America. It's not that we're bad at sports. We're not allowed to have the names on our back of our jerseys and shirts. So now you know how Jews are the way we are and why Jewish mothers think like this. And I must say, there are some classic Jewish jokes on this same topic as well. You know, there's the joke, how many Jewish mothers does it take to screw in a light bulb? Don't bother, I'll just sit here alone in the dark. Jewish guilt at its prime. There's the joke, you know, what's the difference between a Jewish mother and a Rottweiler? Eventually, a Rottweiler will let go. There's the story about 3 Jewish mothers. They're sitting around having a contest, and they're comparing how much their children love them. And the first mother says, my son loves me so much that next year for Hanukkah, he's flying his entire family down here to Florida so we can light the menorah in my home. And the second mother says, that's nothing. My son loves me so much that next year for Passover, he's flying me and his whole family to Israel so we can do the Seder in Jerusalem. And the third mother says, that's nothing. My son loves me so much that he goes to a psychiatrist twice a week, pays him $100 an hour. And who does he talk about the entire time? Me. And that's another characteristic of the Jewish mother. They have no idea that they're making us crazy with all of their worrying and their guilt. They think this is just how you show love to your children. Now, you might be wondering, are there any Jewish jokes about Jewish fathers? There is only one joke that I have consistently been told by other people about Jewish fathers, and it goes like this. A young boy comes home from school and he says, Dad, I have good news. I got a part in the school play. And his father says, that's wonderful. What part did you get? And the son says, I got the part of the Jewish father. And his father says, no. You go back to school. You tell your teacher you want a speaking part. So is that joke about Jewish fathers, or is it actually about Jewish mothers? I think that's actually a Jewish mother joke in disguise. So let's move on to our next topic. The next topic that I want to talk about is Jewish traditions and holidays. You know, what I love about Judaism is that our traditions make so much sense to us. And yet, if you ever have to explain them to somebody who's not Jewish, you suddenly realize just how absurd and maybe even ridiculous some of our traditions are. Like Passover. My mother has a tradition where every Passover she invites one family who is not Jewish to our Passover Seder. Why does she do this? Because she wants to show them what the Seder is like. She believes the best way to teach about Judaism is through the Seder, because we share all of our favorite values. We tell stories. We ask questions. We go around the table learning lessons. I don't know if anyone here, by the way, has anyone here done this? Had somebody who's not Jewish to your Passover Seder? Quick show of hands if you ever have. A few of you are nodding. Great. It's really wonderful. I recommend that you do it. However, it gets very awkward at one point after the meal, right? Because what do they always say? Wow, that was really good. Where's dessert? And what do you say? Oh, dessert. Well, you have to go look for that. And they think this is good news. Their ears perk up, look for it. Whoa, I bet dessert is really yummy if I have to go look for it. And you say, oh yes, imagine a cracker blown up 10 times its normal size with no salt, and it constipates you until September. We hid it under the sofa. It's covered in puppy hair. Go find it. I'll give you $1. After Yontif, which is Yiddish for never. So that's one area where we Jews have totally ruined a wonderful holiday with our foods. And I feel we do this at every holiday. We take beautiful holidays that we have and we destroy them with the worst foods ever invented. Hanukkah. Hanukkah, we celebrate the fact that the oil lasted for 8 days. We commemorate that by eating the latke, a potato pancake that has 8 times the amount of oil recommended by the government, right? Whoa, it's a miracle. Have a heart attack. There you go. We also feel bad for our foods in Judaism. And let me tell you, I have been to Christmas dinners. I have celebrated holidays with people who aren't Jewish. There is no other people on earth who actually has a relationship with their food. But we Jews do. And it happens mostly on Friday nights. What do we do on Friday night for the Sabbath? We bless the candles, right? We bless the Sabbath wine. And then we bless the challah, the bread. Now on Friday nights, we cover the challah. Does anyone know why we cover the challah on Friday night? Go ahead, chat the answer in if you were taught as a child. It's a beautiful tradition. Why do we cover the challah on the Friday night table? Let's see if anyone knows. It's actually a very logical reason as well, by the way. I see a few people typing, so I'll wait a couple seconds. Yes, Haley. Very good. Haley wrote to not embarrass the challah for not being first. So maybe if you didn't know this, I'll explain. We cover the challah because we bless the challah last, and we don't want to hurt the challah's feelings. How Jewish is that? We feel bad for our baked goods. No other people on earth feels bad for what they're about to eat. You will never go to Christmas dinner. Quick, blindfold the ham. We can't let them see what we're about to do. No, only Jews feel bad for our food. So we bless the wine, bless the candles, then we uncover the challah. And what do we do after we bless the challah? We shove a 14-inch butcher knife down the middle of it. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were a challah, that would hurt my feelings a bit more than being blessed last. The multiple stab wounds. Oh, you're bleeding, have some salt, Mr. Challah. That'll make you feel a lot better. But that's what I love about our next topic, about Israel. Why did I move to Israel 4 years ago? Because I wanted to live in a country where I didn't have to feel like my traditions are bizarre and strange. I wanted to live in a country where everyone else is following these strange, bizarre traditions as well. And this is actually the last topic I want to talk to you about tonight. Israeli humor. Israeli humor is very, very different from American humor. Israeli humor is like Israelis. It's more aggressive. It's in your face. For me, the biggest challenge of living in Israel is not the language, not the Hebrew. It is the Israelis. And I first got a taste of the Israeli mindset, the Israeli culture, when I came to do the army at the age of 23. I showed you that picture before. I went into the army when I was 23 years old, 5 years older before the Israelis go. And I really had my mind opened up to what the Israeli mentality is. You might be wondering, what's it like in the Israeli army? Well, here's the best way to describe the Israeli army. Imagine a bunch of Israelis running an army. That's the Israeli army. So imagine an army where everybody hates authority because Israelis do not like to be told what to do by other people. Imagine an army where everyone is shouting and arguing with each other all the time about everything. How do you run a military when no one can agree on what to do next? And yet miraculously, that's what it's like in Israel. They argue and yet they get the job done. Imagine an army where nobody admits it if they make a mistake. Because let me tell you a little secret. Israelis will never admit that they make a mistake. Because in the Middle East, you never want to look weak. You never want to look vulnerable. And admitting you make a mistake makes you look vulnerable. This happened to me on my first day in the army. I had a very proud moment. I got what's called in Hebrew, diskiot. Diskiot are dog tags. It meant I was officially a soldier. I had a personal number that I had to memorize in Hebrew and that I've memorized to this day. 5481287. It had my first name, Joel, which is Hebrew for Joel. But my last name, instead of Chasnoff, they misspelled it. They wrote Schitznitz. On my dog tag, it said Joel Chasnoff. So I went to my 18-year-old commander and I spoke to him in my American Jewish day school Hebrew. I said, "Hey, Boker Tov HaMefaked Yeshli She'ela Ktana." And already that Hebrew points you out as a sore thumb that you're speaking Hebrew with that terrible accent. But I told him, I said, "They misspelled my name on my dog tag." So what was his response? Such an Israeli answer. He said, "So don't die." Welcome to the Israeli army. And that's what Israel is like. No one wants to apologize in Israel. And I can say that I'm living through this now. I have been married to a Yemenite Persian Israeli for almost 22 years. And I can honestly say that in 22 years' time, only once has she apologized to me for anything. Now, this is the opposite of me. I grew up in Chicago in the Midwest. In the Midwest in America, we apologize for everything. If we go to a restaurant and order a certain meal and the waitress brings the wrong meal, we apologize to the waitress that we've now caused her more work. We feel bad. But in Israel, they don't want to apologize for the same reason. It makes them look weak. My wife and I once had a huge argument and we both said some very hurtful things. And afterwards, I did the right thing. I apologized for all the bad things that I said. And then she tried to apologize to me, except she gave me an Israeli apology. She said, "Yoel Motek, I'm sorry. You're such an idiot." That was her apology to me. And of course, I forgave her because I'm from the Midwest in Chicago where we forgive people for everything. So now, before we conclude, I'd like to actually open up the room and ask you if you have any questions about humor or about life in Israel now, or what it's like to have kids in the army, or anything else that's on your mind. And then we're going to conclude with a little PowerPoint about how Israelis are handling the coronavirus. So any questions people have, you can either unmute yourselves and ask them out loud, or you can chat them into the chat box and send it to me that way. I'll give a few seconds. If you don't, we'll just move on. That's okay.
I don't think we've given them the ability yet to unmute themselves. You want us to?
Can you unmute them? Yes. Grant them the power.
We will grant you the power. Well, you're all going to get muted for 1 second, so just unmute yourselves now, Joel and Shmuel.
Quiet.
So someone asked, when you had to say, sorry, Metzarer or Ranat? I don't know. Ofer, I apologize. I don't know what those are. What are Metzarer or Ranat? Maybe it's a joke that I don't get yet. I've only lived in Israel 4 years. Ofer, explain it to me in the chat. Now I feel very vulnerable in front of all these people that I don't know what you're talking about. I will say the accent is, maybe that's what he's making fun of. You can learn Israeli Hebrew. My vocabulary is extensive, but the ability to say the resh, to make the R sound, the resh, and the ayin sound, those are the two biggest letters that are a challenge to me. Mitzrar, it's a bombshell that explodes to many small pieces. And yeah, very humane. Thank you very much. So yeah, those words are impossible for Americans like me to say. I would just say bombshell instead. Other questions people have? I will say that, what about my daughter's name tag? Yeah, much better now, but I warned them both. I have twins and they both went in. I warned them, when you go in, make sure they spell your name tag correctly before you actually get them. Someone mentioned apologies for Yom Kippur. I'm going to sell I actually did this already. I sent your rabbi a little thing about apologies. Maybe he'll share it with you before the service. It's an updated confession to God about all the sins we committed during the pandemic in alphabetical order. So we can, apologies should be saved for Yom Kippur. Now, so real quickly, before we conclude, people have asked, how is Israel handling coronavirus? And until about a month ago, the answer would have been wonderfully. Israel was actually held up as a model to the world for how to handle it. We had much lower numbers than most other countries of our size. They put some very strict government restrictions into place. The country was shut down before Passover. You could not do Seder outside of your home. Of course, the Prime Minister, Bibi, went and did the Seder somewhere else, and it sent the wrong message to Israelis. And that's why they think for Rosh Hashanah, it might be much harder to keep people in place. But one of the great things about, if you can say there are great things about the pandemic, or one of the silver linings about the pandemic is that it's really created a lot of the great Israeli humor about the related to the pandemic. And most most humor in Israel is actually shared through WhatsApp. I don't know if you're familiar with WhatsApp, but WhatsApp is the text messaging program that Israelis use to communicate. And I really mean all Israelis, because even kids here in Israel have mobile phones, and they start getting them usually in first or second grade because they're so independent. And a lot of these jokes have been going around on WhatsApp. So now I'm going to share with you just a little glimpse of what Israelis are saying about the pandemic, some of their jokes. So, Ma Omrim Ba'aretz. This one says, Letoshavei Bnei Brak, Kiryat Sefer, Mea Sha'arim, Machar Yesh La'aziz et Mechogei HaSha'on, Alpaim Shana Kadima. So I'll translate that. It basically says, to the residents of Bnei Brak, Kiryat Sefer, and Mea Sha'arim. These are the ultra Orthodox neighborhoods. Tomorrow, we are moving our clocks forward for daylight savings time. We're moving them forward 2,000 years. What's the idea behind this joke? Well, the idea is that when coronavirus first came out, these ultra-religious neighborhoods did not respect most of the precautions. They believed that if God wants us to get sick, we'll allow that to happen. And if we're not supposed to get sick, we'll allow that to happen. And they were sort of living in the past. And so the idea here is, hey, let's move our clocks forward 2,000 years. Here's someone posted, Techach yoredet lizrok zevel midurageshet beramot. So this was going on during the quarantine when everyone in Israel was pretty much holed up inside our houses. Someone posted, I'm about to go out and throw out the trash. I'm so excited. I prepared clothes yesterday. Just the idea that getting outside and getting any fresh air at all would be a huge sigh of relief. Here's one, mitla betet, that means I'm debating. Tiyul bar mitzvah, that means bar mitzvah trip. Here in Israel, when you have a bar mitzvah, usually it's tradition that your parents take you on a trip somewhere. So mitla betet, tiyul bar mitzvah, biyamenu, ma yoter kedai, super farm or super sal. So the idea is, where should we go for our bar mitzvah trip? What's the better trip? To Super Farm, the pharmacy, or to Super Sal, the grocery store? Because unfortunately, no one is going anywhere exciting. All the trips are just down the block. This one was actually shared by an Israeli Arab. It says, to everyone who's complaining about the change in the taste of shawarma and falafel during the coronavirus, let me know, I'm letting you know, this is what falafel and shawarma taste like when the workers actually wash their hands. If you've ever been to Israel and eaten falafel or shawarma, you'll know that these are not very sanitary establishments. They touch the money, touch the food, touch the counter. But now with the pandemic, they're actually washing their hands and people are complaining it tastes differently because it's sanitary. And last of all, this is a very popular and sad one. If you walk around Israel, you'll sometimes see signs like this. When, God forbid, someone dies, they put up a sign announcing where the Shiva is going to be held. And this one says, Baruch Natbag Emet. Natbag is the airport here in Israel, Ben Gurion Airport. And what this is saying is that Shule, Zichrano Livracha, has passed away. Shule is an acronym for Chutz La'aretz, meaning trips outside of Israel. I don't know how they do it. Israelis do not make a lot of money at all, and yet they all are able to travel. And one of the favorite things Israelis do all year round is find deals to travel to Shule, to travel outside of Israel, whether it's Greece or Cyprus or Italy. And this year, unfortunately, no one is traveling. So this is a sign making fun of our mourning the death of trips to Shule. And a lot of Israelis really relate to this, because if you ask them what they miss most about the pandemic, it really is being able to go overseas. Usually August, Israel is empty, and Israelis are not used to dealing with Israelis during the month of August, but now we are, because there is no more Shule. So that concludes my portion of the evening. I hope you enjoyed this, some of this insight into Jews and Jewish humor. I'll open up the room to any more questions you have before we depart, and then I will sign off and leave you to your rainstorm while I continue the rest of my day here in Ra'anana. So any other questions, please just let me know.
Thank you
And
very
if
much.
not,
Joel.
Shmuel, I'll turn it back to you.
Very
Oh, thank you so much.
It's just a very just interesting when you told your first joke about the rabbis, and you said the head of the priests and the head of the imams, and then you said the head of the rabbis. I think that was probably the funniest part, because no one actually no one actually considers anybody else bigger than themselves. So I think that was the
Well, yeah, that's the only hole in the joke. We don't have a rabbi who speaks for all rabbis. We don't have a pope. Maybe we need one.
yeah.
Dream on.
Dream on, right?
Well, someone's
Thank
asked.
you so much, Joel.
Oh, thank you. Someone asked if I developed a good South African accent in Ra'anana. I could if I wanted to. There are plenty of South Africans here. And what's really interesting is why different people make Aliyah. Americans make Aliyah usually out of Zionism, because they believe in the dream of coming to Israel. But a lot of South Africans make Aliyah simply because they want to get out of South Africa. They don't believe that they have a future there. They think that it's a better place to raise their kids somewhere else other than South Africa. And the French right now are another big population that's moving to Israel, simply because they think it's dangerous to be Jewish and a Jew in France. So it's really fascinating what motivates different people to come. I haven't picked up the accent yet, but who knows? Check in with me 10 years. You never know.
Joel, I don't know if you have another minute or two for us, but I saw one
Sure.
of your. I was YouTubing you. When we and you don't have the prop with you, so I don't know if it'll be as effective. But you showed us a board game that you had growing up. It was like a Zion.
Oh,
It was hilarious.
you know what? I'm going to get it. I'm going to shut my camera off for 10 seconds and I'll bring it. I know exactly where it is because I showed it to a group yesterday. Okay, I'll be right back.
Very good.
Anyway,
Hang in there, ladies and gents.
you want to say anything, Shmuel?
No, I'm not as funny as him.
Yeah, I think as rabbis we try our luck on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur with the jokes.
I had a checklist to see how many I can tick off that I've heard or said.
You could never do this in a comedy club. If someone asked a question, you couldn't run home and get it. But that's one of the great things about Zoom is we can just run to the bedroom and pull this out. Yeah.
Does it look like it?
So when I was a kid growing up, my family had a game, and this game was called Aliyah. And this is an actual board game that we would play. We would play it on Friday nights after Shabbat dinner. And the point of the game was to move to Israel. And I often show this game to Israelis because Israelis often ask us, why would you move to Israel? I was raised here. I grew up here. I have to live here. But why would you choose? It's so hard. And I often show them this game and I say, this is where I got my Zionism from a young age. We were playing Aliyah and I actually have the board of the game so you can see what it's like. It's probably the most simple board game ever invented. You start out in America right here and you fly to Israel. But first you fly to, let's see, what is this? You first fly to Australia and then South America, England, and Spain, and then Israel, which is what happens when you book your flight on the El Al website. But in any case, this is where Zionism comes from. It comes from learning about Israel at a young age, and I'm glad you brought that game up, Rabbi. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's probably out of. I think it's out of print.
Yeah, it's probably worth thousands of dollars now, right?
Absolutely, but that's where you were originally brainwashed. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know if brainwash is the right term, but indoctrination at a very young age. Yeah, I guess it's the same thing.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have any questions?
Lovely. Yeah, very, very good.
Malvin asked, what is the best way to learn Hebrew? I think immersion. There's actually in New York City, in Harlem, which used to be a very African-American neighborhood and still is in large parts, there is a new charter school in Harlem. I think it's called the Hebrew Day School. It's a public school, so they can't teach Judaism, but it is the only Hebrew immersion school in New York City. They teach math in Hebrew, science in Hebrew, and the kids come out of that school speaking Hebrew. Many kids who are not Jewish, they speak Hebrew much better than the kids who come out of Jewish day school. So I think surrounding yourself with people who speak Hebrew and who don't speak English is probably the best way to learn the language.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Joel, have you ever been to Australia?
I have. Thanks for asking. I meant to mention it. I performed at the Melbourne, they had the Melbourne Jewish Comedy Festival 5 years ago. I don't know if it's part of the Melbourne Comedy Festival and there's just a Jewish section or if it's a separate event, but I did perform at the Melbourne Jewish Comedy Festival and had a great time. It was one of my highlights of my comedy career. I really loved it.
Did you see a kangaroo when you were here?
Oh, we drove from Sydney to Melbourne, and unfortunately saw many kangaroos by the side of the road. It was a little troublesome for my kids.
They were all
But,
sleeping.
we saw them live as well.
Wonderful. Look, a big round of applause to Joel and for his time.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I hope to see you. I do plan to tour Australia again, so I hope to see you live whenever I do get down there.
Brilliant. Joel, I should just say that you started off by saying how joy and humor is such a big part of Judaism. And I can't help but be a rabbi for a moment and actually just thought about, it clicked that we picked the perfect week because the parsha we're taught about in this week is one of the main parts of Judaism is joy. One of the,
Really?
it says, Tachat asher lo avadata Hashem b'simcha. Some of the negative things that took place is because we served God with the oi and not with the joy. And
That's great.
it's definitely a big part of Yiddishkeit, and we picked the right week to laugh.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for
For us
sharing
here
that.
in Melbourne,
Ugh.
we're still in our very strict
Ugh.
lockdown. So it's definitely brought some joy to our hearts and to
I hope so.
forget about what's going on outside.
It's good to.
Thanks, Joel.
Thank you, everybody.
Laila Tov,
thank you,
everyone. Hope
everybody,
to
for
see you
joining.
again.
Stay tuned
Bye-bye.
to Caulfield or Elwood Shofars.
Shana tova.
Shana Tova Metuka Bli Masecha.
Yeah. Joel, have
Bye-bye.
through the comments. Most of them are very sensible comments and grateful ones.
I hope so. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Take care. All right, we'll stop there.